When I first started approaching this topic, I was intimidated by it because I felt that I only understood this family theme in terms of like a sentimental approach, and that turned me away from a lot of the artworks. But I realized that, like we've said, is just a really broad context in which we can unpack other themes. So for one of my analyses, I started with the concept of motherhood and womanhood, and I ended up drawing themes about female sexuality, fertility, conception, but also distinctions between motherhood and motherland, so that ideas of reproduction and conception can actually be expanded to encompass like physical territory. One example I guess I'll give is this really wonderful Eskimo sculpture that's primarily made of soapstone, and it's this boat. And there are these little heads and little voyagers that are kind of like peeking out of the boat. And the context behind that is the artist's name is Joe Talirunili, and his sculpture is called Untitled Migration. And it's a sculptural homage to an Eskimo tale which kind of secured his family legacy, in which there was this group of voyagers that were trying to make it to a certain location in the Arctic, and it ended up being a really dangerous journey and many, many deaths, near starvation. And what happened in the end is his grandmother encouraged the group to kind of like muster up the last of their materials and the last of their strength and build a traditional boat called an umiak. And they ended up sailing to the island and doing so successfully. So the artist appropriates this image of the boat in his work, but also appropriates this idea of making as a generational kind of like echo. So his grandmother needed to make this boat in order to ensure her community's safety, and he in turn appropriates this family legacy and makes a boat in his artwork. And I find that really interesting, and I ended up kind of highlighting the role of the grandmother in this case. So his work inadvertently speaks to the mother figure as one that brings her family to land. And so that's just like a really interesting way of how a really broad theme like the family can kind of come down to this idea of motherhood and territory and family and legacy. And that was one of my most promising, I guess, analyses in this class for sure.